Hey guys, welcome back to Neckar Park. The very last video of Neckar Park, actually, and you'll notice that I am not going to do much interesting stuff in this video. It's more or less just going through the park and finishing the things that still needed to be finished, which is mostly a bit of foliage and a bit of rock work here. Just all kinds of smaller things, especially in the Dutch area though. It's mostly the filling up of the area of all of the empty grass spaces that I still have, which means lots of trees and bushes and new path elements, which are just about the only really interesting and new parts of this video. And it's also a really short video, and I'll talk about all of the reasons why this is such a short video and why this is going to be the last video right now. Basically, since I'm going to Gamescom, I don't have any other time left to actually finish this park, and since I made the palace a day ago, which was supposed to be the day that I would finish Neckar Park and get some extra stuff done and get more things done than I'm doing now, I don't really have any time to finish this park off properly, and hell, I don't even have much time to finish these videos off properly, so I'm just doing what I can here to at least finish the park in its current state in a way that I was always planning to do so, and just covering up the areas which I can't work on anymore, with lots of foliage or coming soon signs, things like that. The park definitely won't be looking unfinished or like it still needs a lot of work to actually look presentable, but I'm not going to go with the original plans. The Scandinavian plan was scrapped quite a while ago, and some other refurbs of other sections of the park that I was hoping to maybe do are also not going to happen. I'm just going to really call it a day here. So yeah, that's what's going on here. Now, this being the last episode, it is kind of a nice kind of video to look back a bit on it and talk a bit about my future plans again, because I don't really have any other opportunities in which I can do so really. So as a final conclusion of sorts of this series, I am quite happy with the park. It's something which I am probably not going to end up doing again in Planet Coaster though, at least not anytime soon. The idea behind this park was mostly to make something on a very small scale and just keep it on the realism and on the details, but I almost found during the park that I was like looking for a bit more of a challenge, and while it definitely was a challenge to make this park the way it is, especially making all of the pieces in the game as unrecognizable and add some extra touches of realism that the game itself doesn't have yet, it didn't really feel as challenging when it comes to larger landscapes or more unique and creative architecture, that kind of stuff, and it's really just really limited to what I wanted to make for a small realistic family park. So the next couple of projects, and I'm not entirely sure what they're going to be like, it all kind of depends on what I find in Alpha 3 and what I think works best with it. The next couple of projects are going to be on a much larger scale and a bit more creative, doing some more unusual things again and trying to step out of that keeping everything 100% realistic kind of bubble. And there are a couple of plans which I am thinking about. One of them is to make a very large park, very much like Disney, but probably more like Universal Studios Islands of Adventure, since water is coming in Alpha 3, and a lot of new themes that can really make that sort of very large fantasy-themed park. And another option would just be to go completely fantasy, have a park which is huge with all sorts of huge roller coasters that you wouldn't realistically build because of their costs, and large structures just kind of go haywire just for fun. It's either one of those two, and which ones it's going to be kind of just depends on what I feel like and what turns out to be the thing that works. But after this very small scale park, I definitely am looking for something bigger. But I'm still quite happy with Neckar Park, even though it didn't turn out to be as much of a challenge as maybe I had hoped for. Especially in the later sections of the park, the Dutch section in particular, I'm quite happy with how it turned out. Try to really get that cozy, charming look to it, and while there's so many different things that I don't like about this park, which I try to not go on about, it was in the end also a really good learning experience, especially about the details that I wanted to get in before I move on to larger things again, like Elfheim and like Grizzly Valley. So yeah, that is basically what I wanted to say about that. To get on the topic of this video a little bit again, Most of the stuff which I'm doing here is pretty much just filling up the area, so you could see I was adding some lights in there, some benches. I'm actually quite happy with how the lights turn out, even though they are more or less a copy of the lights of the Eclectic Palace. And a lot of very open foliage, since this is a new area of the park, and especially these parts between the paths and between the buildings. Kind of, I wanted to make them look as just very newly planted areas where the bushes still kind of need to grow and where the trees are still very low. I'm not going to try and turn that into a poem. So yeah, that's all just very simple stuff, but what I also wanted to do is actually change the park border. And you can probably tell I'm trying to fit this as much as I can within a rectangular shape, since part of what I wanted to do with this park, realism-wise, is actually give it a real park border and try and stay within that, and also have it have a sort of realistic park border, so it's really square and had to fit the park in a very compact way within that border. So that's why you'll also see me replacing some of the borders of the park, or instead of adding fences to mark the border, have some sort of trees in a row, stuff like that. And also I wanted to cover up some of the entrances to the rides that I still had, because those things are just, even though they're nice, I don't really like having those yellow gates everywhere. And with this last one I just figured, if you can't beat them, you can just join them. So instead of covering the entire thing with some sort of house, decided to just cover up the yellow parts with wood and put a whirly rig over it, which actually turned out to be quite nice as well. If I were to still have more time to develop this park, where the whirly rig right now stands would have been a windmill, which was more or less the idea that that would close off the facade and sort of make a very large weenie for the Dutch area, because as small as this park is, I still wanted to get some weenies in. But alas, that would take a lot of time, and I don't have that much time, so I ended up just placing a quick whirly rig, which does have the advantage of bringing another flat ride into the park, because especially with a park this small, you do want to keep it quite dense with the flat rides and things like that, so it's good to have at least 3 flat rides and a roller coaster and a restaurant into the Dutch area, so there's really enough stuff in this area to go around with. And the rest of this is more filling up the foliage. Closer to the park border though, there is still quite a lot of more dense foliage, a bit more foresty, and I wanted to fill in many of these open places with a lot of bushes, but that's really just about the foliage, which is boring. Now the last thing that I still wanted to make is some sort of thing around this ride, not necessarily because it's really that necessary. I could have just left the queue open, but the way that the Dutch area is laid out, it's really like one sort of very large winding plaza on different levels. And all around that there are like some larger structures. So you've got the pirate ship on one side, you've got some buildings on the other side, you've got the coaster on yet another side, which really closes in the plaza, but it really felt very open. And like it didn't really end properly on this side, since there isn't really anything that's very tall here. So I wanted to put a building over the queue, which also has the added advantage of being able to cover up the yellow gate again, so that's another problem out of the way. And it just makes the entire area come together a bit more, I think. And this was more or less my idea of what I wanted to do in the original planning. The original planning was to have a round ride at that same place and have a row of facades behind it, but this works more or less in the same way, at least when the mass of the buildings is concerned. So that finishes off this area of the park quite nicely. And the last couple of things that I still need to do around here, and this is really the very final part of this video. I won't film any of the adding extra trees around the park or anything like that. You'll just see that in the final video of the park, don't worry. Yeah, just some extra foliage over here, a bit fancier than the regular foliage, with some flowers and things like that. And very last but not least, a bit of a backstage area. I realized I didn't have an actual staff building yet, so a building which is really behind all of the scenery and hidden by a lot of smart foliage and houses over here, to actually have some sort of retreat for the staff to work at. So the very last thing which I wanted to do, which you might not even see in the final video, but it definitely sort of makes its impact if you look at the park from above as a bird's eye view, is a small staff building. Just a quick rectangular building with, I don't know what kind of retreat staff members would usually have, with their little cafe or toilets or something like that. And cover that up with a bit of foliage, and that is pretty much it. So thank you guys for watching this series, and I hope to see you guys in the final video, and on to the next one.